Welcome to the Chorosophy podcast. Let me just start out by telling you a little story about what happened yesterday. I tried to do my first ever live stream episode and failed miserably. So there's that. Had a couple hundred people jump on to the first minute of my chat with Michael McGlynn. Probably would have gotten lots of people as we chatted for the next 2 hours, thinking we were live. But at about a minute in, my Wi-Fi disconnected. I reconnected it, thinking I was still live, but apparently after looking back, the live stream was severed, but my Zoom kept telling me I was live, so I thought we were all good and we just kept on chatting. Now the good news is it was being recorded, and it ended up being a really, really fun conversation. It was really nice to have a conversation about music again. I've been focused so much on the pandemic and about the choral industry's response. This is just not in this episode at all. And we chatted for a long time, so I decided to release this in two parts. So today you're just going to hear the first hour of my chat with Michael McGlynn, who is just a fascinating human being and gives us a lot to ponder and a lot to think about, especially related to this pause of our art form as being an opportunity to think about how we want to, in his words, reboot what we do as musicians, choral musicians, educators, all of that. So it's a fascinating conversation, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. So I'm going to bring you the first hour in part one, and then maybe a few days later I'll churn out part two, where we really get into some challenging ideas about our profession, and so you're going to hear lots of interesting topics because we didn't script this one at all. Like most of the time when I have a guest on, I have a topic that I want to talk about with that guest and get their feedback on. This had no predetermined ideas at all. We just decided to turn on a conversation and just see where it went. So we started talking about Anuna and his life in that world of music making, and then it just went. It just went where it went. So shout out real quick to the Patreon sponsors and the growing group, continuing to grow over there on Patreon, that is really keeping this show alive, which I super appreciate. If you appreciate the content we are creating here at the Chorosophy podcast, I encourage you to head over to patreon.com/Chorosophy. And for as little as $3 a month, you can jump on over there and get some behind the scenes communication about the show. I publish a Patreon-only episode once a month over there, in addition to putting some extra materials. A lot of there's a T-shirt you can get at the $5 level, but you can get in over there at $3 a month, and you'd be surprised at how much that helps with the expenses of the show so far. After about a year and a half of doing the show, I'm kind of plugging away at trying to break even on all the expenses of putting on something like this, and these people are killing it for me over there. The show has a producer level. Our producers are Christopher Vasquez, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, and Ryan Main. So head on over there and help us out if you can. Now we can say hello to anybody who's on Facebook, and I think I'm still working on the YouTube.
Hello, everybody out there, wherever you are. Greetings from Dublin, Ireland, as opposed to Dublin in America.
Is there a Dublin, to your knowledge, in America?
There is. There's. I have no idea. I think it's in Ohio or somewhere. I don't actually know, to be 100% honest. But there's a lot of things about America I don't know. I haven't been there as often, probably, as I should have, considering my group are associated so much with the whole Irish Celtic revival. We only started touring America in 2012. No, yeah, we did a tour in 2007 for the first time, and we haven't been back since.
Okay, so, and I just saw in the chat, Emmy said that there is a Dublin, Georgia.
Yeah, there probably is. It could be there, and it's somewhere, Georgia, Ohio.
I bet you there's more than one. And
America's a small place,
right? So maybe we should do another geography quiz. Where is the original Zeeland?
Zeeland, that's in the Netherlands. That's I can't remember whereabouts. Not sure if it's up near the Zuider Zee or something. I tour a lot there. I should know more about the Netherlands, but and in fact, considering the fact that it is extremely small, I have no excuse for not knowing.
Well, do you prefer the old Zealand to the New Zealand?
The old days of Zealand in the 14th century. I remember them well. before the floods.
Well,
So,
I think I'm pretty sure that in America we assume that anyone with an Irish accent has just been alive since the beginning of time. So
well, I think that is actually a really good point. I think in America, the perception of Ireland is, I don't know, I think if I ask you, if you were going to define Irish people in two ways. First of all, I'll ask you two questions. The first one is, tell me about what your general perception of somebody who is Irish would be.
okay. General perception of an Irish person. Well, I've met several, so it's kind of hard. I think um, before I had been there and before I had actually seen it, I would probably have made, I bet you I would have made a similar assumptions about the stereotype that people tend to make about people around where I live in the Midwestern United States, that we all live on farms and we all have, cows and Southern accents and those types of things. And so I probably would have made similar uh, assumptions about it. Irish people all have gigantic green lawns, like as far as the eye can see. Like everybody's yard is a rolling hill of some kind, and
Mm.
of course, running a lot of the stereotypes I would get from watching your Anuna videos is
Oh,
that
yeah.
you probably wander through cloudy um, scenes and sing as you walk around. All Irish people, I'm sure, do that. How close?
Well, okay. So that's question one. So tell me, what would your perception of Irish choral music be?
Well, I mean, honestly, outside of your group, I don't know a whole lot. I
Mm.
would, I'll there. I've seen what's the I think is like a Trinity College Dublin or something. Is that a
There's a choir. Well, there's choirs. All the major colleges have choirs. Trinity College. I actually used to conduct a choir in University College Dublin and in Trinity College Dublin. So choral music is here. It's just the perception of it is very interesting. I mean, for me, the first time I went to America to meet my colleagues in the choral music world was in 2011. And I went to ACDA National in Chicago. I don't know if you were there. I do remember it was a few days before St. Patrick's Day. And my God, what a place on St. Patrick's Day. But I diverge a little bit. Anyway, I was saying that the perception of choral music coming from Ireland. I was in Chicago at the ACDA National Conference there in 2011, and that was the first time I met all my colleagues. I hadn't met American choral people before. I was an eminent scholar at Florida Atlantic University. Uh, with Dr. Stacey Lee Russo, and we were working on a large project. And I went to ACDA that year, and I met everybody, and I didn't actually really understand how big choral music was in America. And also, I think what the perception of choral music was from my country. And I was shocked to find out that actually I was the perception of choral music from Ireland, which was kind of strange because in Ireland, I would actually not be. I have no connection at all with Irish choral music at all in any respect, either as composer or as a choral director. I don't give master classes. I don't lecture. I don't get commissioned. Um, my pieces are performed usually by school choirs, and they perform possibly one or two of the pieces I've written. And the effect of Anuna in Ireland is nil. I mean, people do know we're there, and we do appear. We're dragged out in mothballs every 10 years or so. But despite the fact that the average age of Anuna is 24, and we're the only national touring choir, that means that we're not state sponsored. We actually pay our own bills. There's no grant aiding for Anuna. It's a business. So when we tour, we make money, the singers get paid, and there's no other group like us at all in Ireland. It's a very strange kind of an existence to exist as the representative of your country in a field and yet not exist within that country at all. So when I went to ACDA, I made the decision at that stage that I would become a citizen of the world of choral music and not one that was beholden to Ireland in any way. And over the last 9 years in particular, I have changed the way Anuna functions. So singers now come from 10 different countries. And while there are a lot of Irish singers involved, and they come from Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, but they come from the island of Ireland. We have singers from Slovenia, from the Netherlands, from Italy, more Slovenians, Americans. I keep forgetting, big pile of them from Iceland. And we've a Russian hanging on by his fingernails. I hope he's watching.
Now, is there an origin story for Anuna that we wouldn't be able to find on a website? Like, was the business model that you just explained, was that always the plan, or did that just evolve over time naturally?
That's a brilliant question. I haven't been asked that for many, 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 many years. It's kind of an interesting one to think about. The business model for Anuna was that there wasn't a business model of any description. When I began singing, the first choir I ever sang in was when I was 19. And that was the first choir I ever heard. I hadn't actually ever heard a choir before that in person. I'd only ever heard recordings of things. And even then, I think the only piece I remember that was choral was Ave Verum by Mozart and Lux Aeterna by Ligeti, which is kind of a strange sort of combination. But I had them in my mixtape. I had a great mixtape that I used to drag out, and I'd have David Bowie and The Clash, and then I'd have Ligeti. I wasn't really into Mozart really at the time. So for me, when I came to choral music, it was like opening a window that had been closed for many years, and suddenly the air came in. And I remember somebody described at the time that it was like how I could describe that sensation of coming across choral music for the first time, and it was like watching the sunset for the first time and seeing it. And I think that it suddenly struck me that this was something I wanted to do. I wanted to explore it more. I wanted to develop it more within myself. And there were a couple of obstacles. The first one was that I started asking questions because I couldn't understand why other people were involved in choral music for themselves. And I was really only interested in choral music as a means to looking at the beauty of it. And I use that word very carefully because I don't really hear music, I kind of see it. For me, it's like a cloud of images. And I was so angry. I was so angry because I hadn't been exposed to choral music as a child. And our culture, you see, doesn't have choral music, indigenous choral music as part of its culture. It has imported choral music. And in fact, I've caused some controversy here by claiming that Anuna has created a new form of choral music in Ireland. Well, it has. It is the only group that specifically has based itself on the concepts and the ideas that are inherent within our traditional singing forms. But that's not what people would think. That doesn't mean we just sing Irish diddly-idly songs or moch bono things. It's more the philosophy behind our tradition, our language, and our culture, and that informs Anuna.
Could you back up for just a second, and for our Americans listening, define diddly idly?
Diddly idly is most of the crap that you guys listen to on St. Patrick's Day.
So the Irish stereotype that we were discussing earlier.
The Irish stereotype, but bear in mind, hidden within the Irish stereotype is the truth. And I have no objection to that. There's nothing I enjoy more than meeting a bunch of African Americans wearing green hats, saying, "I'm Irish." And you were going, "You are Irish." because actually anyone wearing a green hat is Irish, because being Irish is really a state of mind. And for that moment, it's not definable. Being Irish is just, I live here. That's Ireland out there, out my window, and it's lovely and everything. I don't think anything belongs to any of us. We're only visiting. So for that moment, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, some of the ridiculously silly, sentimental ideas that make up the perception of Ireland are are successful for a reason. It's because they're real in their own way, you know? It's about joy and fun and talking and laughing and having a few drinks and falling around the place with a couple of friends and eating crappy green food. Sure, isn't that what Christmas is about? In so many
Right.
ways, you
Well,
know,
I was going to
it's a
ask,
holiday.
right up until the point where you said it wasn't definable, I was going to ask you to define it. So that's too bad.
Well, it's not. You see, but that's not really part of our culture. In many ways, our
Right.
culture is much more complex than that. Um, Way more complex. And Anuna bases itself, and the philosophy behind it bases itself in our culture, in our arts, and in our landscape. And remember, landscape is just a thing that we look at.
Mm-hmm.
In itself, it means nothing. It's how we look at it. It's how we interpret what we see. And artists and writers and singers and in the traditional musicians have looked at that landscape and they have seen something in it, and then they have attempted to create music around that. And Anuna bases itself in that way, whereas the rest of choral music in Ireland does not. It looks to other choral music forms for its inspiration. So, for example, there's a very strong allegiance and connection to the Kodai school. An awful lot of Kodai students practice here as well.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them actually have a lot of interest and excitement in connection to American choral music and some of the extraordinary innovations which are occurring there. But Anuna exists outside of that. It takes what it needs and only takes exactly as much as it needs in order to move forward. So we don't take the trappings, we don't take the empty gestures. We try not to take any ego. We try not to take the sensation that people are beholden one to the other. At our center is the concept of community. And our traditional singing is based in that idea. So the style of singing is called sean-nós, which is that very highly ornamented traditional sound. In fact, the most well-known aficionado of it would be, for those people that know Celtic Woman, it would be Ava McMahon.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, she was in Anuna. Ava is possessed with is the community, the concept of carrying on something that is very old and then carrying it through time to the community today, and they appreciate it and they learn from it. And therefore, she doesn't sing accompanied because that would distract from the words and it would distract from the melody. So Anuna, its basis is that you are a single representative of the community, and you are singing with others who are single representatives of that community. And that's a very complex thing in its simplicity. So when singers come in, particularly American singers come in to Anuna for the first time, the level of proactivity that is expected from them, particularly the professional ones, is massive and a huge learning curve. And the line I get from American singers more than anything else, which is, I don't mind saying it because I've heard it from so many of them. I say you need to be yourself when you perform. And their response is, look, I can sing in whatever style you want. I can be what you want me to be. And I say, well, I don't want you to sing in a style. I want you to sing with your natural voice. And I want you to sing without distortion, without showing us your effort. And when you do that correctly, and you breathe with the people around you, and you do what they do with the same intent in what you do, and understand the words that you are singing, then the word blend does not apply to your work. And I hate the word blend. I think it's appalling because it's putting two things together that are not compatible.
Yeah.
We celebrate that difference. We celebrate your voice as an opera singer, you're a folk singer, you're a rock singer, you're an early music singer. Be yourself. And if you're
Mhm.
both doing it with the same degree of focus on techniques which we teach the singers, then you're off.
Yeah, I
That's summed up now. There you go. I
yeah,
can go now.
you did it. You did it. Yeah, yeah, I very much agree with the concept that you just described related to blend. It's not one of my favorite words either. Um, and one of the reasons it's not one of my favorite words in choral music is because of I do not
You're back.
understand.
You're back in the room.
Yeah, this is so strange. I don't know. I feel
One
like
of the one of the reasons I don't like the use of the word blend, I think, is I got as far.
yes, yeah, yeah. I don't like the use of the word blend either because it tends to cause singers to take what is special out of their voice.
Hmm.
Um, and then the choir sounds overall less special. Whereas I like the way you described it because what I try to do with my singers is I want you to sing with your voice. I like that as well. But there has to be certain things that we agree on in the way we conceptualize the music in our head because that's what will end up coming out. So I use the word audiate, just picturing the music in your head. We have to agree on that. We have to be
Hmm.
hearing the music in our head in the same way. But then what comes out is your voice in with that intent. I really like that a lot. So of course I shout out to a couple of my friends, Nick and Laura, who have sung with you, um,
Oh
and done
yes,
all of that. Of
Laura
course,
Inman
yeah,
and
and
Nick
Nick
Stoffel.
Stoffel. And one of the things that's interesting too about that is American singers. I've found, and this is not about the two of them; they're awesome. I just feel like a lot of times with American singers, you put a group of adults together, adult American classically trained singers, and we will walk into a room. Say there's 16 of us, and we will walk into the room with 16 different ideas in our head of what a choral sound is supposed to be.
Hmm.
And so
Oh yeah.
that's one of the biggest challenges. I always talk about how with my youth choirs, with my student choirs, oftentimes I can achieve blend a whole lot faster and easier just because they don't have competing ideas in their
Hmm.
head of what it's supposed to sound like. We just talk about what's it supposed to sound
Hmm.
like, and then they sing, and we get to that blend idea. Then when I work with adults, it takes a lot of energy and time. Now, with
Hmm.
the singers, when you bring singers in who are not Irish,
Hmm.
do you have to invest quite a bit of time in getting them to understand that picture of the sound?
No, because we don't do very much singing in general. We just talk.
Hmm.
So you have to. I mean, I can see where you're coming from. I think that the problem with adult singers is very simple to explain. Um, and that's that choral music has been massively overcomplicated. And there's a whole industry has built up around making it that way.
Hmm.
When in fact, choral music is extremely simple. And the problem is, you see, you already have an indigenous form of choral music there in America, which in some ways is, I mean, I did notice and was very telling when I went over there how little understanding there is of what is going on in gospel. I mean, it really does shock me to a certain extent that people look to European models for their inspiration when in fact gospel itself and the African American tradition of singing um, is so much more natural in the way that it is done um, that it's like, well, we do it right in Europe, and no, we don't do it right in Europe. If we go back 200 years, in fact, not even 200 years, yeah, exactly 200 years, we come to the era of the conductor, we come to Mendelssohn, and then later on we come to Wagner, Mahler. But before that, there weren't any conductors. But there were the people that bait time, as we'd say. We give it now bit. In fact, the English composer I met a few years ago. In fact, he mentored me many, many, many years ago, and that was Colin Mulby. He's very well known, and I think you're frozen again. Oh no, have you still got me? Still have me? Okay.
I'm good.
Well, uh, I spoke to him at a extremely good Indian meal in London, and I asked him about this concept of the conductor, and he said, "Well, I was playing the organ, and then one day someone said to me, 'Oh, the choir need somebody to beat time,' and he'd go down, and that was Colin. And he was my inspiration. His conducting technique was this. That was his conducting technique. And I couldn't really understand that when I worked with him as a very young person, because um, what I couldn't understand was not what he was doing. It was more that the singers around me didn't understand what he was doing, because they kept talking about technique and conducting technique. And Colin, with the greatest respect to him, didn't really have any. But what he used to do was he used to say, people around him saying, "Oh, he's not getting us to blend and he's not getting us to keep time there. And look, we're not matching our vowels." And he would say, "But that's your job. That's your job. It's not mine." And I thought, my God, that's really common sense. So when singers come into Anuna from any background, unless they have these really personalized affectations, I mean, we get that sometimes with opera singers when they come in, where they come in and an A vowel doesn't sound like an A vowel, an E vowel doesn't sound like an E. And we have to explain to them that say the word and now sing it, because the person beside you is singing an A vowel and you're singing an rarg vowel. And rarg is grand and everything, but it actually isn't what the word means. So if it says the cat sat on the mat, I'm just looking at my cat actually up in the window, is about to commit suicide. Oh, there you go. Oh, she's gone next door. And the, you know, if you say the cat sat on the mat and it sounds like the crot sat on the mat, then if you think about it, the singer is transmitting their effort to sing that. They're not transmitting the words. If you're making an effort to sing something as basic as that, then you don't have any singing technique.
Yeah.
So don't come in and tell us what to do. Go away and work out what it is that you have been told that is not accurate. I mean, another thing I have with a lot of American singers, young American singers, is this use of vibrato. And we have it here to a certain extent in Ireland, where you get a young singer coming in and they get totally confused when they come into Anuna, and they start talking about straight singing and they sing about lack of vibrato. Vibrato is natural to the human voice. Vibrato that sounds unnatural is not natural to the human voice. Opera singers are not generating a natural sound. What they're doing is they are amplifying a natural sound. So the best opera singers, if you look at Monica Bonney singing or any great singer, I'm not so concerned about the way she looks and whether you see the effort she's making to do it. It's more that she is using her body like a machine to amplify the sound and send it out in a completely unnatural way. I mean, it's really extraordinary. So the amount of technique and thought that has to go into that is beyond belief. And opera singers, particularly at the high end of the business, are like, I really have to say that those people that sing in choral music that don't talk to opera singers of repute, who, and I don't mean people that have a good reputation, I mean people that you want to go and listen to and don't sound like a bag of cats being strangled. Those people think about singing in the way that we should all think about singing. They're actually creating a huge sound and they're trying to make it be produced in as natural way as possible. And of course, the best, if you want to see two people trying to do the same thing, look at a child of the age of 4 and then look at an opera singer who's good. And they're doing the same things. It's the same technique.
Right.
Anyone that is giving you information that doesn't make logical sense should be called out. And when you bring that into my group, the singers will call you out. People will say, "Why are you putting vibrato in the middle of the phrase? Does your voice naturally sing like that? Da, 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 da. What does that sound? So vibrato is essential in your voice. And then you have other singers who come in and they sing with no vibrato. Oh, my voice naturally is no vibrato. If your voice has no vibrato, it's not a natural thing because your voice is naturally relaxed in the way it works. And if the vocal cords are relaxed and the muscles in the neck are relaxed and the jaw is relaxed and the tongue is relaxed, you'll have vibrato.
Mm-hmm.
So these are not controversial ideas. These are most good opera singing teachers or teachers of opera will advocate you do not transmit the effort. If you're transmitting the effort, it is not a natural thing. The biggest problem with a lot of choirs is that they have a conductor in front of them. If we go back to what I was saying about Colin Mawby, before Mendelssohn came along, choirs, conductors were one of many. They were one of the ensemble. So therefore, they were part of a relationship which was proactive and very different. So then you have people standing up in front who people come to see the conductor, and then they're in front of these bigger orchestras, and then these choirs are there, and they're bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then the orchestra goes away, and then you have the conductor standing in front of the choir, and they're orchestral conductors conducting choirs. So suddenly you have orchestral technique being applied to something which actually has diminished the role of the choir. No longer is that relationship an equal relationship.
Yeah.
It is the maestro. The maestro has come in. Maestro, I get called maestro quite a lot. I don't even know what it means. I think it's a credit card here in Europe. And you know, for me, looking at that relationship, what's wonderful to see in the USA in particular is that is people know that, and I do find that a lot of conducting technique in particular has been developed to try and nullify that. So you developed something to nullify something unnatural. Well, what Anuna do is we just nullify the concept of the conductor entirely. And that means there's no conductor. I've never conducted Anuna, never. And yet I can take a masterclass with the conductor. And the reason is because once the conductor assumes the correct role and the correct relationship, they usually go, oh, because most conductors like you, Chris, are working so hard to do work for your ensemble that you don't need to do. Mm-hmm. So you have to train your ensemble, or let's put it in a better language, allow your ensemble to take control of what they are doing. And then the relationship is different. You are not a conductor like a bus conductor. Mm-hmm. You are an artist, and you are expressing your artistic view of the music that these artists are singing. I hear that word a lot in America, but I don't believe it as much as I should. And when that relationship becomes a meeting of two minds, a meeting of artistry, then the conductor is taking their artistry and passing that backwards. And it's not about beating time, and it's not about breaths, and it's not about meter, and it's not about style. The music then breathes, and then the third person comes into the equation, and that's the composer. And the composers write music for these conducted choirs, but they don't really understand that choirs are a community. What people are missing now in this pandemic is this concept of community. They're missing, it's not about being together with their friends. It's about the relationship between the conductor and themselves, and that sense of being part of an artistic creation. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I remember really irritated me once, I did a series of part songs by Haydn with Colin, and we spent a whole week on them, and then we started on something new the next week. And I had reached the end of my tether somewhat with many of my colleagues, and I just stopped the rehearsal and I said, can anyone tell me what we sang last week? And half of them didn't know it was Haydn part songs. These were professional singers. What were they doing there? Because the relationship they should have had was with the composer and then the conductor's interpretation of what the composer was doing. But it should have been a proactive relationship. Do you know what I mean? So,
Hmm.
and Anuna, and I'm not veering off the point. This is what is at the basis of Anuna. So I think the misconception of what Anuna does is that it looks like, because of the way we dress, because of the way we present ourselves, and the beautiful images of young people walking through forests and over hills being attacked by ant flies or in bogs. If you saw the outtakes of those. But those concepts of the way Anuna is presented are based on what the music is about, because the music is about the landscape. Music is about ideas of landscape. Um, and, you know, it's why when people come into it from abroad and singers come in, or professional singers from abroad, we have a wonderful singer, Kate Frisell, as well. She's living over in the Netherlands at the moment, but she's from the USA. And we have Sam Kreidenweiss, who recently left us to join Cantus. But these singers have been transformed by that. And I don't mind saying that on their behalf. They are all transformed by the concept of becoming proactive artists.
Hmm.
It's like, in many ways, they lose that part of the equation. And it becomes more about the act of doing it than it does about the concept of getting lost in the artistry. So that's a long preamble, but I think it's probably, I need to say that. Yeah, I
No,
do.
I that's all really good, and I actually share a lot of that philosophy in terms of the role of the conductor in the
Mm,
ensemble. And I actually, being fully American, I see all of those things, all of those criticisms. I actually agree with
mm.
them. It's one of
But I
the,
think actually, if you don't mind me saying, Chris,
yeah,
my understanding of that is there are people involved in choral music in America who do not want that hierarchical view to change, but they are in a very, very small minority. My experience of American conductors is that they're completely open
yeah,
and that they are willing to take chances. And that, see, that comes back to the point I made about what people are missing. They're missing something which isn't about that relationship. They're missing that artistic relationship. And I think in America in particular, you have achieved that, and there changes all the time. Things are, new ideas are coming in. The fact that Anuna has been embraced by so many American choirs who come this way, and so many choirs all over the world, um, is a sign that people are listening and watching what we're doing. And we're not the only group in the world with these ideas. But unlike, I think, any other group I can think of really, except Chanticleer, I haven't seen it in America in the same way, that sense of a proactive relationship.
hmm,
Um, but I do think we're pushing an open door, and I'm not surprised to hear you say that you would agree with what I'm saying.
yeah. The way I would kind of frame it for you, in my world, like I was talking about before, I work with a group of adult singers, but that's very, very part time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a professional ensemble, but we hardly ever see each other. So oftentimes when we come together, it's for the first time in 3 months, and we might have three rehearsals. And there's not really a sense of that rapport that can be established over a long period of time. But one of the things that we always set out as a goal for that group of adults is that as I sing with you in the ensemble, we don't want to have to respond to my gesture very much.
Mm.
We want this to be, because I sing in the choir. We don't have a conductor standing out front, and I always say from the first rehearsal, I would like to not have to show anything, like
Mm-hmm.
ever on my. But one of
Well,
the
you know, it is possible. I've
yes,
been doing it for the last 30 years.
yeah, yeah.
And
One of the
what's
things.
more, it becomes mystical. The relationship becomes a mystical relationship. And I don't
Mhm.
mind saying that. In Onuna, I haven't mentioned it yet, but in Onuna, we have only one word. The answer to everything is to breathe, and breathe correctly, and breathe in the way you should, and breathe together. And we can start. I mean, we did a concert in The Hague, I remember about 2 years ago, and it was a very large venue, and we had 12 of us, and 6 women were in the auditorium, and they were singing a piece of mine actually that was commissioned by Chanticleer. Song of the Wind, Aron McGuiha, and it's really difficult. And two of the girls were the two sopranos who were singing together were facing away from each other, and they were at least, I'll think about it in feet, they were at least 30 feet away from each other, facing in different directions, and they're singing in unison. And I remember standing on the stage where the guys were standing in a row of six, and the unity of the actual ensemble was extraordinary, but there's no physical way we could have actually heard each other.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is not what techniques we employed to do that. It's more that we were able to do that. And I stood on stage, and that was the moment I thought, yeah, we're doing something very, very unusual here.
Yeah.
It's not choral singing as people know it. And we've, unlike yourself, 3 rehearsals would be a luxury for an Una. We have 1 rehearsal, maybe, on the day, usually with sound and lights. And that's it. If we're lucky, if we get another before it. And we'll do like a 12-day tour on 1 rehearsal.
Yeah.
Shouldn't admit it. But once everyone thinks in the same way, then it's like wearing that pair of underpants that you have one, Chris. All guys have one, you know? You just put it on, and then you come back in 2 years' time, and your wife says, "Is that the pair I bought you 2 years ago?" And then you say, "Oh, yeah, I haven't worn them since." But you see, you know that you've had those underpants for the last 20 years.
You might have lost me with that analogy, but I like it. Yeah, the way I love the way you're conceptualizing this. I think as American singers, it's hard for us to do that because we are raised with that conductor relationship that you described, where
Mm,
I find that singers that I work with most frequently, there's like a subtle, almost like you could say it's a millisecond of a delay between what the conductor does and what the singer will do, because we're kind of trained that we have to wait for the conductor to show us anything, at which point we will then
mm,
we will respond, which means there's always a tiny delay. And I think after hearing you explain it, I'm now starting to picture that if we're not all conceptualizing the music at the same time with each other, then we become dependent on the conductor to show me my entrance,
mm.
show me how loudly I should be singing at that moment, show
And
me.
think how much that inhibits the transmission of the composer's work.
Yeah.
See, this relationship with the composer, because that's really my job. I'm not a choral director at all. I mean, I would never classify myself as one. Um, what I am is I generate ideas. And it's another thing as well, this whole idea of the conductor in control of what um, the choir does is another issue, that you'll get a piece by a living composer. And that's grand. Let's be honest, quite a lot of composers don't have a clue how to write for choir. In America, I think proportionally far more do, because so many choral singers and choral directors actually compose, and there's so many fine composers of merit. It's strange, actually. A friend of mine, David Rosso, I remember he's very modest about his work, and he was showing me some of his work, and all I could see was somebody who lived, breathed, and ate choral music. I mean, it wasn't easy, but by God, it was so beautiful because the lines were there. That wouldn't be something that you'd see easily in Ireland. What you'll get in Ireland instead, and in Europe in many cases, is composers writing things. And I will quote a colleague of mine. We went in for a competition when I was about 6, and we were awarded joint first place, and it was being sung by a choir that shall remain nameless, the BBC Singers. And I remember he was asked why it was that he had 2 pages without a rest for soprano 1. And he said, "Well, you're professional singers, you can sing it." And I thought, that's a load of arse. I mean, the relationship between the conductor, the singers, and the composer needs to know what they're doing. Otherwise, you're producing art. I don't believe that any good composer believes that they are producing art. It's one of the things I love most about Ola and Eric Whittaker's work. I never feel that they're producing art, or at least that they think they are. I think that they produce music that they like themselves,
Mm.
and then they really do their best to try and allow choirs to sing that music. And I would very much be somebody that, for me, the whole aim is to let the choir be able to sing the music. Music that is difficult for its own sake has a place, but it should only be difficult for its own sake because that is the vision of the composer. And there's an awful lot of stuff being written now which is just clever. And there's nothing bores me to death than clever music. I cannot stand it. Or funny music, for that matter. I don't find music very funny at all.
Yeah, it's not my
Um,
favorite. It's not my favorite genre either. I I,
no.
I wanted to share too.
When you're drunk, it's awesome.
Yeah. Oh,
Beer choir, by the way, are amazing. I miss beer choir so much.
yeah. Beer choir. I think beer choir is the first thing we should bring back after the pandemic.
Oh, I
That
miss it so much.
Yeah.
We don't
No.
have it in Ireland at all.
Oh, that's too
I only
bad.
get
That's
it
too
when I
bad.
only get it when I go over there.
Well, yeah. So my evidence that I think to when I hear you talk about this conductor relationship philosophy is that when I then work with my young singers again,
Mhm.
which I get to see them and I get to kind of be their introduction to choral singing, and so I can establish this idea with them right away, and so they don't know any better. Which is that one of the things I tell my students when they come in at age 14 or 15, and that's one of the things we struggle with around here. A lot of my students, we are their first real choral experience because we have an awesome um, choir program for the kids who are younger than that, but oftentimes they have to take general music courses and they don't do a lot of as much singing. And so then they
Mm.
get to our class and they're singing every day for the first time. And one of the things I teach them right away is that my job as your teacher is to teach myself out of a job. I, I don't I
That's
don't I don't want you to need me for anything. And so my kids are quite comfortable not being conducted. In fact, I've even been known to get up on the stage in front of 1,000 people, and just because I'm feeling like I don't want to conduct anymore, I'll just walk off the stage. And
mm,
the kids don't even know I'm going to do it, and they
mm.
just keep singing. And
Well, I
often,
think that that's an achievement in itself to be able to do that. I think that's a very brave thing to do as well.
well, what
I
I've discovered is oftentimes it ends up going better without me there.
But you've got to ask yourself why that is too, because I mean, while I do appreciate that there is a pyrotechnical reason for doing that, and there's almost like a smoke and mirrors concept behind it, I would always question not um, the idea of doing it, but for me, the value is they look up to you and they're watching you for guidance on a far greater level than we'd say a lot of adults will. You become part of their relationship to music is through you.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm always very careful when people do step off stage in front of choirs. Like I'm extremely against choral music, choral movement for its own sake. The moment choirs start moving on stage, I actually, I just have to turn away in horror. I have rarely seen it. I did see a choir at ACDA, a high school choir, moving on stage, and I thought it was the best thing I'd ever seen. I can't remember who they were, but they were from Florida. Absolutely unbelievable choir. Um, but because for me, you know, we have to be very careful about gestures. The reason that Onuna move is because it's ritualistic movement. And what people don't know about Anuna's work, they look at it and they say, oh my God, everyone is so graceful. And when they move, and then they do these extraordinary things of moving into auditoria and singing from like at the other side of an auditorium or up from in Tokyo, up from balcony number 5. And they're singing with people on stage with no amplification and actually not able to hear what they're singing. That's different. And the reason that kind of movement and those kind of effects work is because they have a purpose. For me, um, particularly when I'm dealing with movement, I would never get people to move on stage in secular work. For me, the concept of ritual is really important. It doesn't matter what religion it is, ritual is part of every one. And in the original Christian churches, particularly in the 4th century, people didn't sit down and this is going to sound very familiar to you, but the people didn't sit down and watch the priest. They were in a play, and they would be the crowd responding to what the priest would say, and then they would move this way, and then something would happen, and
Hmm.
then it would happen like this. And the Chester mystery plays in the 12th century, 13th century, 14th century would be kind of part of that whole ethos. And out of that, if we look at Quem Corriges, and the Dublin play in particular, which comes from the 14th century, its ancestry would be from, I think, is that 9th? And those early chant-based um, uh, performances were always involving movement, because but it was highly stylized movement. And stylized movement is awesome. So there's a piece we do called Quis Est Deus, and it's funny, the choir have been singing it for years, and there's a set way they have to do it, and they have to go into a quartet in the center, and then the central soloist comes up and she stands in the middle, and then they bow their heads. And it was very funny. Nobody asked me about that. It's been in our repertoire since 1994, and no one's ever asked me what it was. And I said, it's the four archangels, and they're facing outwards. It's from the Old Testament, and it's not Christian at all. It's not, because the archangels are older than Christianity. And the whole point is, that this concept of doing things which have a meaning that we don't understand is part of the essence of Anuna. Because to be honest, you go and you attend a service, there's things happening there that you don't. I mean, if you understand them, then you're not really getting the whole point of religion. My mother said to me once, she said, the difference between Protestants and Roman Catholics are not really understanding that actually most Protestants are actually Catholics. She said, is that, they explain everything in the Protestant churches, but in Roman Catholicism, they say it's a mystery. It's a mystery. We don't know what it means. What? Go to heaven. What does that mean? Could be anything. Where we go? Who knows? What happens after we die? Nobody knows. So, I think that's at the basis for it. It's building up from actual ideas rather than just gestures. And I'm not knocking what you're doing with the kids. I think it's very good to give them that sense of frisson and excitement. But I would always be wary of any conductor that stands away from a choir, unless that relationship is one which is a proactive and generous and loving and connected relationship.
Well,
It's then
yeah,
when they stand back, it's different.
yeah. No, I think the purpose of it for me is not a choreographed movement at all. The purpose for me is sometimes with kids. One of the things I feel is oftentimes we are scraping things together to be prepared, at the last minute, and
Mm.
I find that those types of moments where I might decide at the last rehearsal, or maybe even in the concert, that I think we're going to do better on this piece if I'm not showing them anything, and it's
But
usually,
you're also a showman, and it's a show you're presenting.
yeah.
Do
Well,
you know what I mean? And that
right,
excitement that you generate is the key to it all. There's
yeah,
nothing wrong with it,
right,
and the audience love it, and the kids go, ah, and
yeah.
you go, oh God, it could
Yeah,
be a
no, I
mistake.
think, but I think what ends up happening is that they oftentimes, like what I was saying before, when I'm conducting them, showing it with my hands, it causes them to always have to wait for me to do a thing,
Yeah,
and they're
precisely.
and then they're responding. And sometimes I find that to be true in the more highly rhythmic pieces that I do with kids, that
Mm.
if or faster tempo. So if I just get out of their way,
Mm.
it locks in, and then they're able
Well,
to
there is a reason for
adjust.
that. There's a very good reason
Oh
for
yeah.
that. I mean, I did a workshop with the choir here in Maynooth, which is outside of Dublin. And it was very interesting. I was dealing with a very good conductor, and he was beating a piece like this. And it was funny watching him do it. And I thought, oh my God, he's just beating the piece because that's what the rhythm is. So I said to him, when you come to the end of that phrase, breathe. When he did, the whole thing went this way then, went into sort of like a wave
Hmm.
instead of being like that. And the question was not, was I right? Nor was he right. The question was, is that what the composer intended or not? I remember I did a masterclass in Spain many years ago, and it was really funny. I was dealing with a group of choral conductors from across Spain, and I was very nervous because I don't really get terrified. It's like, a dog is lovely, but then when you meet six of them, it's not so lovely, One of them's bound to bite you, and then the pack will set in. And it was funny. We were doing a piece by Villalobos, and each conductor came up and they all conducted it, and they put these gestures in, and the choir went and they did the gestures. And then I said, okay, that's interesting. Now I said, I'll conduct it. And I conducted it like this. And then there was silence at the end of it. And somebody said, you didn't do anything. And I said, nothing written in the score. He just had the dynamic. The choir sang at a piano. And then one of the conductors said, oh, he's written all the dynamics into the score, hasn't he? I said, yeah. So that's kind of really important. I mean, a lot of people do my stuff, particular one piece called Gyantry, and it's always interesting watching people conducting it because the rhythm is written into it, so you don't need to emphasize it. And it's got a metronome marking, and that's the speed I want it. I don't want it at your interpretation of what you think it is. The metronome marking is there. I'm a contemporary composer. I am not a folk composer. This is not folk music. It's contemporary music. I'm still alive, for God's sake. And it's lovely. I mean, a song I love as well, which Dulamon, which everybody knows, and it's got, and you can be in your chin and you'll never hear what be in your and I hear people going, and you can be in your chin and you'll never hear what be in your and if, as an Irish speaker, I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, what are they singing about? You have to sing it at the speed that the words have meaning, and it's got a metronome marking on it.
You mean singing? Do you mean to say that singing Dulamon as fast as you can is not an accomplishment?
Well, it is an accomplishment, but not one that I would have wanted as the composer.
Yeah, yes.
So it is. Bear in mind also, Chris, that none of my music, none of it, was written to be sung by anyone besides Anuna. None of it. It is a complete surprise to me how successful I've been in America. It's a complete surprise because none of the stuff is written for choir. It's just written for Anuna. And I've only written it down because, I mean, the first order I got from America was from Chanticleer, and they took Dulamon, and that was in 1996, I think it was. And I sent them a handwritten copy of it with all the wrong notes written in it. So the original version of Dulamon has wrong notes in it.
That's really funny. Charles Bruffy made me memorize the solo for that, and I still have nightmares.
Charles's Irish is sublime.
Yeah, I think that I was in the group maybe one of the first times he started doing your music, because I'm old, so I haven't been in the group for a long time. But when I was young, and I was getting Irish coaching, and I was trying to memorize it, and it flew by so fast. And of course, with the Irish language on the page for English speakers at first, it was the first time I
Yes, the Irish language is very easy to pronounce. It's just there's two problems. The first one is that when it's written down, it looks different to the way it sounds, and that's a real problem.
Yeah.
And the reason that is because we're next to England, and as a result, we had to anglify our alphabet because our alphabet doesn't really look like that. For example, in our original alphabet, we don't have it's A B C D E F G I J L A B C D E F G I L M N O P R S T, and we don't have any of the other letters. Like, for example, the letter V is spelled BH or MH. So, and the way that would be written we use a thing called a puncted, it's a little dot, and it sat over, for example, if you were trying to say the word for verse, no, that's a terrible one. Let's see, Egon Vinjog at the window, BH, is spelled B with a dot over it. And that's like a different letter entirely, which sounds like the. And it's kind of funny when people sing in Icelandic or they sing in virtually any other language, French even at its most basic, they look at these and they learn off these unusual characters and these accents. But in Irish, they kind of go, this is English. It's not English. It's a foreign language of much greater age than English as well. And it is kind of very important that is right. I mean, I love the relationship that Charles has actually with Kansas City Chorale. It's really, it's a unique and special one. That's like a family. That's the kind of relationship that I'm talking about, that lovely sense of doing things together as a unit. And it really, I mean, when I worked with them some years ago, it was just like bliss. And I even got a chance to sing with them, not very well, but I did sing. And I have that on my CV somewhere, I think. I try not to draw attention to the fact that I was so bad. I was going through midlife crisis at the time, you know.
Yeah, and now I imagine. How do you miss is performing on a regular basis right now, since you're not doing it? Obviously, is this something you miss? So at the beginning of part 2 next time, you will hear the answer from Michael of whether or not he misses performing right now. And as you can tell so far by listening to him talk and the way he thinks, you're probably going to be surprised in some ways by his answer. So stick around for part 2. Thanks for listening to part 1. Don't forget, we're getting ready to fire back up for school next year, no matter how it ends up looking. It's going to, who knows, but we're still going to have to go back at some point. So don't forget to head over to sightreadingfactory.com. Get signed up for your membership for next year for yourself and all of your students. It's a great online learning tool, and it's a great tool in the room. Hopefully, we're going to have use for sheet music. We've got composers out there that we need to support, and we need to figure out ways to keep their music relevant. Of course, 2 sponsors of this show, RyanMain.com and GraphitePublishing.com, are excellent resources online for you to get copies of your sheet music for next year as you program. Both of those websites, you can use Choralosophy at checkout to get 10% off. Thanks a lot for listening. Tune in next time for part 2 of my conversation with Michael McGlynn.